What's good, everybody? It's your boy Big Nate. Welcome back to Big Nate's Book Reviews, home of the best book reviews. And today we got a bit of a different video. Today we are going to be talking about a question that I've kind of been sitting on really ever since I started reading. And that is, what is the purpose? What is the point of reading literature, of fiction, generally of story? And this is a question I've contended with for a while. Like, it goes back at least as far as when I started my English degree. And the number one thing everyone asked me is like, why would you do that? What job do you plan to get with that? What do you plan to use this degree in English literature for? Which is basically a veiled way of asking, what is the point of literature? And it's something I've been asked directly, and even just, man to man with myself. This is something I've spent years of my life doing. It's like kind of like my main thing. And of course you're prone to wonder, what is the point of it all? And partly too, this video is going to be a response to a certain type of person. And everyone watching this, I'm sure, will have someone they know in their life that's like this, where generally they just look down on the humanities. They rarely read. If they do read, it's never fiction. It's always some kind of a book through which they feel like they can be productive, like they learn some new fact, gain some new information, read about some kind of study. They think fiction essentially is a waste of time because it's not something that they can immediately learn from. Of course, there is plenty to be learned from fiction. Some of the greatest lessons of my life have come from literature, and we're going to get into all that. But just to kind of tee us up here, that's what this video is going to be about. And before we get into any of that, you guys already know what to do. Let's take a page out of the Big Nate's Book Reviews book and spark this doobie. And today we are smoking this for anyone who is currently reading a fiction book right now. So we're gonna spark this and then let's get right into the video. Okay, so I kind of want to go in order of what I think is like the most superficial reasons to what to me are the most deep and personal reasons of why we read. And the first one, which is just patently obvious to me, of what the benefits, one of the purposes of reading fiction is the ability of fiction to give you new perspectives and kind of like teach you empathy. There are even studies on this that basically show people who read, literally do have more empathy. I mean, insofar as something like a study could actually prove that. And to me, honestly, stuff like that, it's interesting, but it's not the main point. Like, I don't need a study to tell me what I know to be true. George R.R. Martin says, "The reader lives 1,000 lives. The man who never reads lives but one." And when I look to my shelves here, just all the, the hundreds of amazing books that I read, there is such an enrichment of experience just in my own right, because that's what empathy is. You get into these books and it kind of feels in some sense like you're living, and the really good writing is able to convey those experiences which otherwise you don't have access to. I have just a few examples right here that I've read recently. I mean, just look to any one of these books. Any piece of fiction fundamentally is going to do this. But War and Peace, what it's like to actually be up on that battlefield, really be taking bodies, seeing gruesome injuries all around you, that comes with war. And it's one thing to read about the War of 1812 and Napoleon and Russia. You can learn about it in a factual, semantic kind of way, but what literature does is it gives you the experience of it, like being the soldier, being on the trenches. So through fiction, I'm able to travel back to Russia in 1812 and live all the different... This book has over 200 characters in it, famously, and you can see it's a tome. So to read this and say you don't come out enriched, to me, is just impossible. So that's one thing in terms of, what is the purpose of literature. Up next, we're gonna go quicker through these, but The Narrative of Sojourner Truth. This is another book where it's like, you hear about slavery and what it was like in the South in America in like the 1800s. And I've talked about this before with Beloved and like The Narrative Life of Frederick Douglass. So I wanna mix it up and talk about Sojourner Truth, because she is a woman slave, more so even kind of like almost like a house slave. That's not totally true, but compared to like what was going on in the South, because you typically think the North United States was actually kind of chill, but then you read accounts like Sojourner Truth where, for instance, she has an early childhood memory of like her brother and her sister, and basically some dude pulls up on a sleigh, and even the little kid is excited, like, whoa, look, cool sleigh. And that dude literally was coming because they had been sold into slavery. She talks about the realization of the brother when he realizes they take, his sister, put her in a sleigh box, then he also gets put in the sleigh, and he runs home like he's trying to hide. It's not an outwardly violent scene like with Frederick Douglass where they're getting like, we're talking whipped, lashes, lacerations, like, real bad, like life endangering shit. It's not like that per se, but still you have these like heart-wrenching scenes, and the slaves are still sold like cattle. Like, there even be posters, it's like cattle, livestock, and slaves, like they're just one category, and they travel together. For all intents and purposes, they were a unit. It's just like crazy that perspective. That's the whole point, that empathy. You read about slavery, everyone's read it 100 times, but to hear the Sojourner Truth, to hear the Frederick Douglass, slave narratives in general, all of these in some sense result in an enlargement of consciousness. Like, you have more perspective on what it was like to be a slave at that time. So again, just one of the things, like empathy, understanding new perspectives. We went to 1812 Napoleon, now we go to 1800s Sojourner Truth, African American. And perhaps a little more modern is something like Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. And this to me, you know, gives you the perspective of someone who is like gay or LGBTQ plus, in the sense that like society stigmatizes them. Like being in the 50s, the 60s, earlier, really anywhere, like being gay was considered, and still kind of is considered, like a bad thing. And that comes out here in Giovanni's Room, 1950s France. And basically, like, I don't know, I feel like the inner torment of someone who is gay and you like literally just can't express that. Like if you're a guy, imagine if liking women was something that was looked down upon and something you got bullied for and ostracized socially, you know, all those different things. And I feel like the perspective I got from this book is someone who has like an inner torment and not letting them fully express what they naturally and organically want to do. And you know, the idea that you would really base like life decisions and your happiness based on like social conventions. I don't know, I feel like I didn't quite do a good job of describing like the actual aesthetic, you know, beauty of this book, but shout out to Giovanni's Room. These three books are just very random kind of ones that just came off the top of my head when I thought about books that gave me new perspectives. And I want to talk about this idea that I've seen too. Like for instance, my cousin, he just finished A Picture of Dorian Gray and he was reading the Goodreads reviews for it. And one of them was basically like, you know, I didn't like this book because it was just a bunch of white men and I couldn't relate. But if you only limit literature to what you can relate to, that kind of defeats the purpose, because the whole point is there's a whole universe of other experiences out there that, you know, even though, because in some sense I can't relate to Napoleon in 1812 and anything like that, but because we are all human, there are certain themes that are timeless and that everybody can relate to. That's why when you read the Odyssey and the Iliad from over 3,000 years ago, it still hits as hard in the modern day. So all of this has to do with like the perspective, empathy, timeless human experience. Like you can't read these classics, you can't read this bookshelf here and tell me you don't come away enriched. But all of that basically just has to do with like the perspective, empathy aspect, which to me in some ways is actually kind of like the least interesting or impactful. Obviously, like that's a huge aspect of literature, but like the next reason what I think is, you know, what is the purpose of literature? What is the point? In terms of my own answer here, that is, I can say literature has truly changed my life. And I don't mean just in the sense that like, wow, I read a beautiful book, that was so amazing, like wow, that changed my life. I'm talking about like in material, tangible ways. The insights that I have got from literature and philosophy are things that have affected my life decisions. For instance, I remember when I was considering, it was the first time I was like really contemplating dropping out of my PhD program. Like that hadn't even occurred to me, but then I was reading the Stoics at the time, people like Cicero, Seneca, stuff like that. And there was this huge emphasis on time and the finitude of life. Like death is a reality. You do not know when it's gonna come. And I know that's cliche, but it's literally facts. Everyone watching this either has already or will know somebody who dies a very untimely, unexpected death, and there is no reason that that can't be you. Time ultimately is your most precious commodity. And when I was in the program and everybody had just got their master's, I was like 3 years into it. I'm like, do I want to spend another 3 to 4 years like doing this thing which I'm already like totally sick of, or do I want to like just prioritize my happiness? That's the thing about Seneca and Cicero and Plato and just all these ancient, this is a theme throughout all of literature, is that the point of life in some, you know, real sense is happiness. Like whatever brings you joy, that should be the North Star of where you take your life. But so many people don't do that. They get caught up in the productivity, like external, conventional, societal standards of success. They chase that even though it doesn't make them more happy. Whereas things like philosophy and literature and whatever it is for you, that thing that brings you delight, that's where you should point your life towards. So all of these things, it's like, and then I dropped out and it was one of the best decisions that I ever made. And this is where it gets funny. This is where it gets a little mystical. Joseph Campbell, who wrote The Power of Myth, and you know, we've talked about him a lot at the channel, big fan. He has this superstition, he calls it, that people who follow their bliss, like that's his phrase, follow your bliss. People who do that, the universe conspires to make things happen for them, opportunities to appear. Because I feel like that happened with me. Once I dropped out, I just got this perfect remote biostatistician job, Johns Hopkins. It was like, anyway, it just felt like, damn, I feel like the universe threw me a bone. So these are texts that, having read them, it actually, I feel like, tangibly changed my life. And then there's things that just also change your life, but almost in like a psychological sense. There's a passage in East of Eden, for instance. I mean, the beauty of this book is that they're literally throughout the entire thing. But of course, there's that passage that always sticks with me, the one where basically coming of age and realizing your parents are real flawed people. He describes it like the gods who get dragged, whose idols get dragged in the muck, and you can take it out, but you can never have it quite get that same shine again. That's the realization, like, oh damn, like you see your parents do some fuck shit basically, and it's like, damn, okay, you kind of, not, this is not so strong, but like you lose respect for them. Not that, but the existential respect of childhood into adulthood. In this book, the beauty of it, like I said, is that the whole thing just consists of things like that. Like you read a book, anyone who's read East of Eden, I feel like will readily attest to like this book has changed their life. Come to think of it, I knew this girl who had a tattoo of Tim Shell on her arm. So like, you know, tell me that's a good sign that this book be doing big things. And then there's something like Brothers Karamazov, which people will say similar things of, but I recall the Grand Inquisitor chapter. I think that's what it is. It might be distributed across the book, but like Ivan, one of the three brothers, Karamazov, basically comes to Alyosha, who's like a very devout Christian, and lays out the most like elegant argument against God, low-key, in terms of the problem of evil. Like he saves newspaper clippings, and I think they were based on real events that took place, of just the most heinous shit. Like I ain't even gonna say it, but like bad things to kids. Like Ivan lays it all out. And that's the thing, this is also all within Dostoevsky, because he was Christian, but he's someone who really dealt head on. And in fact, Alyosha's response to that might be Dostoevsky's, but we can't get into that. That would be, you got to get to the book for that. But these two books right here, you know, I can say I feel like have changed my life, just the way I think about the world. And that's just two. You know, we got this whole bookshelf up here. So when people look at me and they say, what is the point of literature? What's the purpose of literature? I'm like, you know, I have to tune it out. I have to tune it out. Not to mention too, the prophetic nature of fiction, like George Orwell's 1984. That's constant, you know, that was high school reading even for me, and look how it reflects back into modern society. There's a line there that's been floating around. The party told you finally to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. And we all just saw in broad daylight, like if you watch that video, this man, Alex Preddy, straight up just got murdered by an ICE member. And ICE members themselves are just a bunch of like weird incel people. They're fat, they're uncoordinated. These are just like racist people basically who want to get a power trip on guns. And this is exactly what happens. You get Renee Good, you get Alex Preddy, all the other people. That's just what we saw immediately on video. And I'm sorry, but like the purpose of literature, and you know, for instance, the rise and fall of the Third Reich, it is so clear that this is the paramilitary group that gets organized by the dictator, the wannabe dictator. And Trump has been saying very alarmingly, like, this is horrible. He has been saying for the longest time, like Trump 2028, that he's gonna do 3 terms. He's hinted that for like years at this point, which is just insane. And he's throwing billions of dollars at ICE, and it's just, everyone's seen the videos. Like, we don't need to get into it at this point, but the 1984 prediction still holds true to the modern day. And in fact, please drop a comment. I know everyone's got their example of some kind of prophetic writer. David Foster Wallace with entertainment culture and addiction to television, let alone social media and the internet. That's another example of like a prophetic writer. So all of this is just to say, like, there are real insights, things to be learned that come from literature. And there are many books on this shelf that I feel like have changed my life. And that's kind of like my superstition about literature, is you take it all in. And this is true of film and art and music. You take it all in, it transforms your soul. Like, I know that's a little cliche, but like, that's what it means, right? To say that something changed your life. It changes you a little bit, it alters you a little bit. And in that sense, that is going to filter back out. It's going to bleed out into everything else that you do, like your interaction with strangers or family members, friends, everything, in capacity of how you live, like what your soul is. That's going to, like I said, ripple out into every single aspect of your life. So when you consume literature that fundamentally changes who you are, that's going to come back in, I think, overall positive ways. Like that's, like I said, that's my superstition. Basically, like literature is good for you. And aside from all of this, like what I think the most important reason of all to read fiction and literature is simply that we get an intrinsic joy out of it. It is simply delightful to do, to engage in literature and music and art and all the different aesthetic beauties. There's actually a mathematician who says mathematics is like music, neither needs to be useful. Because once you get into pure mathematics, there's really no real application. But he describes like the reason we do mathematics is the same reason we enjoy music. And if you don't understand that, then there's nothing I can explain to you that's going to make you get it about why this is something that we do, right? What is the point of it? The question of what is the point of literature even already implies that there needs to be a point at all. So this whole video in some sense is kind of moot. I read purely because I like to read. So anyway, there's a lot more we could say. I would love to hear everyone's comments. I know people got good thoughts. There was a much larger discussion to be had here about what is the purpose of literature. So drop your reason for why you read literature in the chat. And without further ado, thank you guys so much for tuning into another Big Nate's Book Reviews video. Get to the Big Nate Discord, get to the second channel, follow me on Instagram at Big Nate's Book Reviews. We got big things coming on all the above mentioned. So thank you so much for watching Big Nate's Book Reviews, home of the best book reviews.